democracy is something that is very important. Human right is something that is very important. So we need to understand and comprehend what is at stakes. And I think the best way for us to comprehend what's going on in the world is to ask questions. So if there is any question, then there's opportunity to ask question to Dr. Lawrence. So, if there's no question for the time being, then we will go to the next speaker. I have the opportunity to introduce right now Mr. Adotei Akwei. He will be talking to us concerning human rights, especially in Rwanda. The truth is that the fact that we are human, we have rights. And those rights are actually God-given. It's not something that we need to argue about. It's something that we are born with. We're supposed to be free because we are human. And all of us, we are endowed to have the pursuit of happiness, liberty, and of course, life. So I will call Mr. Adotei Akwei to come and discuss with us concerning human rights in Rwanda and other places in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. I'd like to welcome and thank my colleagues on the panel, and also like to thank Henrietta and her organization for pulling together this press conference. But first, I would like to say something to the family of Kizito Mihigo, and then talk a little bit about the situation of human rights in Rwanda. Amnesty is shocked and deeply saddened by the news of Kizito Mihigo's death. The Rwandan authorities have stated that he committed suicide. They must immediately launch an independent, impartial, and thorough investigation to determine the cause of death, including whether it was an accidental, or a case of suicide, or homicide. There must be no whitewash. The investigation should establish all the facts, including the possible involvement of others, and whether prison practices and conditions caused or contributed to Kizito Mihigo's death. A little bit of background about the case. On February 14th, the Rwandan Investigation Bureau confirmed that Kizito Mihigo had been arrested in Nyaruguru district, close to the border with Burundi. He was accused of attempting to illegally cross into Burundi, joining, quote, terrorist groups, and because of corruption, as well as breaching the terms of his release from prison in 2018. Kizito Mihigo had previously been close to the ruling Rwandan Patriotic Front, but in April 2014, he was arrested after releasing a gospel song in which he prayed for victims of the genocide and victims of other violence. In February 2015, he was found guilty of plotting against the government, forming a criminal group, and conspiracy to commit an assassination, and was sentenced to 10 years in jail. In 2018, he was released from prison by presidential pardon, along with opposition politician Victoire Ingabire, on condition that they report to the local prosecutor once a month and to seek authorization before traveling abroad. Unfortunately, Kizito is not the only name that has been in the international press recently. Just later in 2019, we had the case of Jackie Umuhoza, the daughter of a pastor who is in exile, who was arrested on November 29th and remains in detention with no explanation given for her detention. Just 2 years ago, we were all involved and concerned about the case of Diane Rwigara, who was a subject of a deliberate and quite overt attack by the party's loyalists and by the Rwandan judicial system. All of these are unfortunately very, very alarming indicators of the state of the rule of law and human rights in Rwanda. Although Rwanda is seen as a successful in developmental terms, the price of development has been the forced subordination of the population so that no criticism of the state be tolerated. This has resulted in compromised elections, with opposition parties largely suppressed opposition candidates imprisoned or driven out of the country or assassinated. It has resulted as well in the suppression of freedom of the press, suppression of independent human rights organizations. In short, it bears marks of a repressive autocratic state under the guise of democracy. These reports are echoed by the United States Department of State. In 2018, the Department of State Human Rights report on Rwanda said that Rwanda is a constitutional republic dominated by a strong presidency. Human rights issues included reports of unlawful or arbitrary killings by state security forces, forced disappearances by state security forces, torture by state security forces, including asphyxiation, electric shocks, mock executions, arbitrary detention, political prisoners, arbitrary unlawful interference with privacy, threats and violence against journalism and journalists, peace and crackdowns on freedom of assembly, association. This is not the resume of a successful democracy. These reports are echoed by reports from my organization, Amnesty International, as well as by other organizations such as Human Rights Watch. There are a number of reasons why the death of Mr. Mihigo needs to be investigated. Because there are other people who have been disappeared and who have been killed. And there have not been any answers or explanations of what happened to them. This is why in our recommendations to the government of Rwanda and to the United States, we start out first by calling on the government of Rwanda to establish an independent judicial investigative mechanism into unresolved killings and disappearances, including the murders of Andre Pagwa Rusereka, Jean-Leonard Rugambaga, John Damascene Habarugoria, Illuminate, and Jean Damascene Munyasheka, and Boniface Twagirimana. These individuals are unfortunately just emblematic of the repression that is going on in Rwanda. But we cannot allow people to be disappeared and to be forgotten. We also call upon the United States to review its security assistance to Rwanda, ensure that any assistance that is given is subject to Leahy law vetting and restrictions, which prevent U.S. assistance to military units and security force units that are linked to the commission of grave human rights abuses. But more importantly, we call upon the government to increase funding for programs focused on rebuilding respect for human rights, the rule of law, and the independence of the judiciary. This engagement is not an option. The Rwandan people deserve the support of the United States and the international community. The Rwandan people deserve and have their rights, as was pointed out earlier. And the government of President Paul Kagame must be held accountable. It must be called upon to prevent restrictions on or harassment of opposition politicians, their supporters, journalists, and human rights defenders. We must make sure that this tragic death of Mr. Mihigo is not forgotten, it is not pushed to the back, and that people who try to express solidarity with victims of genocide or even critique or question government policies do not suddenly become disappeared. Thank you very much.